Tragedy, strategy, tragedies.
Tragedy,
Hello, hello,
strategy,
good morning to
tragedy,
you.
strategy.
What do you like? What do you do? What do you do? Hey, it's Hadar. Today I'm going to share with you the ideal morning pronunciation practice. You want to think of it as a physical workout or a yoga practice that you do in the morning to get energized for the day, but also to build muscle. And this is exactly the same thing, but in this case, we're talking about the articulation organs. You want to do that in the morning
In the
to
morning.
set yourself up for pronunciation success,
Okay.
but also to build the muscles of your articulation organs like the tongue and the lips
And the
and the
lips.
jaw.
And the
Now,
jaw.
I recommend doing it every single day so you're more in control of the sounds that don't exist in your native language, but it's also going to help you sound more clear in your native language as well. You can do it in the morning, but you can also do it before going into a meeting or before having an important speaking gig. Okay, let's get started. But before that, if you are new to my channel, then hi and welcome. And this is a place for you if you want to speak English with clarity, with confidence, and freedom. So be sure to subscribe and click the bell to get notifications so you don't miss out on any valuable lesson. Let's begin with massaging your jaw. It's always good to become aware and kind of relax all unnecessary tension. We're going to start with that and end with that. There is a muscle here at the jaw hinge that connects between the upper jaw and the lower jaw, and usually we hold a lot of tension there. So I want you to massage it and kind of like try to release all the tension and maybe hum. We're also warming up the voice. You don't have the morning voice. Cheeks, and again the jaw. Maybe move it around a little bit with your hands. Okay. A little more. Okay, good. Now we're going to warm up the tongue. Let's begin by sticking the tongue out, and we're going to move it to the right and then to the left. To the right. We're going to do this 10 times. Okay, so right, right, left. Okay, now we're going to stick the tongue out and bring it up and down. So stick it out and keep doing it. I'm going to keep speaking again. Push it out as if the tongue wants to come out of your mouth. 2 more. Very good. Now let's stick it out and bring it back in really fast 10 times. As far as you can. Okay, good. Let's release tension and blow your lips out. Okay, good. In the next exercise, we are going to clean the teeth with your tongue. So you want to move your tongue around. Keep doing it. Now this is a really good exercise, especially before a meeting, so you make sure that you don't have green stuff or poppy seeds stuck between your teeth. I got you covered. Keep your lips closed. Good. Relax your lips. Good. Now we're going to use the tongue to massage the inside of the cheek as you're resisting the tongue with your cheek muscles. So, take your tongue, the tip of the tongue, and push it against the inside of your left cheek while the cheek is actually resisting it. So you want to push against. You want your tongue to feel like it's fighting something as you're massaging it. inside your mouth. And to the right. Good. And now let's do a trill to relax the tongue. For some of you, this is going to be really easy if you have the trill R in your language. If you don't, you can just do another lip trill. And now we're going to do it while going up and down in pitch. Massage the jaw a bit more. Very, very good. You're starting to feel your mouth, to feel the tongue, which is good because we need the tongue to articulate the sounds, and to be able to do it clearly, we need to be in control of the tongue. Now we're going to warm up the lips. So push the lips forward as if you're pushing it for a kiss, an exaggerated one, and pull it to the sides. Forward. Now try to keep the cheeks out of the way, right? You don't want to go like this. Okay, you don't want to get used to engaging your cheeks when pulling the lips. Sometimes we need that to articulate some of the sounds, like the E and the A, and we want to be able to control these muscles. So just the lips, the corners of the mouth, and forward. One more time. Okay, very good. Make sure you're not feeling tension in your shoulders. Tell your shoulders to relax. Tell your face to relax. Okay, good. Now we're going to go into a few sounds. Let's start with the tip of the tongue consonants. Let's begin with a T sound. Ta, 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 ta. Make sure it's just the tip of the tongue touching the upper palate. Ta, 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 ta. Da, 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 da. Na, 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 na. La, 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 la. Let's do it together. Ta, 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 ta. Da, 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 da. Na, 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 na. La, 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 la. Ta, 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 ta. Da, 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 da. Na, 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 na. La, 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 la. Now we're going to move the tongue back a bit and switch between S and Z. Z, 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 z. Now we're going to move on to consonants created with the lips. We're going to start with a P sound where you bring the lips together and release air. P, 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 p. And then the voiced version of it. B, 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 b. And then we're going to go to the nasal version of it. Ma, 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 ma. Pa, 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 pa. Ba, 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 ba. Ma, 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 ma. Again. Pa, 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 pa. Ba, 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 ba. Ma, 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 ma. Let's add vowels to it. And we're going to use the consonant N. Ma, ma, my. Ma, ma, my. Ma, ma, my. So we're going into an I diphthong. You want to drop your jaw and then raise the tongue for an E sound. Ma, ma, my. And then we're going to go into ma, ma, may. Ma, ma, may. Ma, ma, may. Ma, ma, may. As in day diphthong, starting with an E, shifting into an E. Ma, ma, may. Ma, ma, may. Ma, ma, may. Then we're going to do a long O as in go. Ma, ma, mo. Ma, ma, mo. Ma, ma, mo. Good. The next diphthong is going to be ma, ma, moy. Ma, ma, moy. Ma, ma, moy. Oy as in toy. Ma, ma, moy. Ma, ma, moy. Ma, ma, moy. And finally, we're going to use the ow diphthong. Ma, ma, mow. Ma, ma, mow. Ma, ma, mow. Just like in mouse. Ma, ma, mow. Ma, ma, mow. All five of them, one after the other. Ma, ma, moy. Ma, ma, may. Ma, ma, moy. Ma, ma, moy. Ma, ma, mow. Let's do it again. Ma, my, ma, ma, may. Ma, ma, mo. Ma, ma, moy. Ma, ma, mow. One last time.
Mama my, mama may, mama mo, mama moy, mama mow.
Very good. Now we're going to move to the back of the mouth, pronouncing the k and g. From there, I want you to shift to the high E
It's such a
sound.
fault, or like
G-g-gee.
g-g-gee,
So the tongue pulls back for the g, and then forward for the high E.
g-g-gee, g-g-gee,
And then
k-k-key, k-k-key,
Good. So let's do it a few times.
g-g-gee, k-k-key, g-g-gee, k-k-key.
And then from there, we're going to move on to the tense oo sound, a back open vowel sound.
G-g-goo, g-g-goo, k-k-koo, k-k-koo, g-g-goo, k-k-koo, g-g-goo, k-k-koo,
Make sure you push the lips forward for the oo sound. Let's do it 2 more times.
g-g-goo, k-k-koo, g-g-goo, k-k-koo.
Very good. And now I want you to yawn. Like raise the soft palate by yawning. Good. And let's find the voice and bring the voice to the chest.
Hello, good morning. Hello,
good
good morning.
So you want to bring your voice to the
Hello,
chest.
good morning. Hello, good
Hello,
morning.
good morning to you. And then
Hello,
let's bring
good
the voice
morning.
to the head.
Hello, good morning. Hello, good morning. Hello, good morning. Hello,
You want to feel the vibrations here?
Hello, good
Maybe
morning.
a little bit to your nose.
Hello,
Good morning to you. Good morning to you.
Hello.
Okay, let's move on to some tongue twisters. Let's start with my favorite,
New York, unique 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 New York.
Let's say it again a little faster.
Unique New York, unique New York, unique New York, unique New
Now,
York.
as you're moving through the days, if you do it every single day, you'll see that it's a lot easier for you to say it faster. The next one is good blood, bad blood. Good blood.
Good blood, bad blood, 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 good blood, good blood, bad blood, good blood, bad blood, good blood, bad blood, good blood, bad blood.
The next one is tragedy, strategy.
Tragedy, strategy, 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 tragedy, strategy.
All of the time. Let's do some TH warm-ups. So let's start with just sticking the tongue out and pronouncing a voiced TH versus a voiceless TH. Now we're going to work on transitions. N to TH. L to TH. You can also use the voiceless TH. Very good. And now STH. Make sure to squeeze the tongue out. The tongue is not too tight against the teeth, so the air comes out. Let's do it a few more times. Very good. Relax your lips. Release air. And massage your jaw again. Good. Very good. Finally, let's do some chunks. What do you? What do you?
What do you want? 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 What do you like? What do you like? What do you like? What do you like? What do you do? What do you do? What do you do? What do you do? What do you say? What do you say? What do you say? What do you say?
Next one is go
Gonna go. Gonna go. Gonna go. Gonna go.
Gonna go.
Gonna go. Gonna go. Gonna go. Gonna go. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go. She's 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 gonna go. I'm gonna go home. 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 I'm going to the office. 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 I'm going
Next
to the
one is
office.
could have. Could have, coulda,
Coulda.
coulda,
Coulda. 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 Coulda.
Notice that the D is really, really light. It sounds like a flat T, like a ra, like an R in Spanish. Ra, pero, coulda, coulda. I coulda. I could have been that. I could have done that. I could have seen it. I could have seen it.
I could have been there. I could have been there. I could have seen it. I could have done it. I could have seen it. I could have seen it. I could have seen it. I could have been there. Coulda. Shoulda. Should have. Woulda. Would have. Coulda. Shoulda. Woulda.
Okay, that's it. To wrap it up, I want you to put your palm on your belly, one on your belly, one in your chest, and try to breathe into the hand that is on the belly. And breathe out. Close your eyes. Breathe in to your belly, not to your chest, and breathe out. And last time, and as you exhale, you can also release a sound. Breathe into your belly. Okay, that's it. As I said in the beginning, I recommend doing it every single day. And when you do, you will feel the improvement and how easier it is for you to articulate sounds in English and in your native language as well. Now, to make it fun and to hold each other accountable, every time you complete this exercise, write in the comments, done. So we know that you did it again today. Have a beautiful, beautiful day, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.
Okay. Oh, it's like magic, just like magic. Go, go, Power Rangers. Go, go, Power Rangers. Boring, boring, boring. Boring, boring, boring. Thinking away ahead. I wouldn't. What? I said I wouldn't. My gosh. Whew, boy, oh boy, oh boy. Yes. long chapter. Damn. What the heck? Come. Oh. No way. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. When does it stop? Holy moly. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. Pull. 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 David Cade said the word over and over to himself. Left hand. Right hand. Slowly, the big iron bucket, filled with gravel, rose on the pulleys to the rim of the huge hole in the ground which the dry diggings had become. Beside David, Jack leaned on his pick and stared down at the ground, too worn out to raise his eyes. Pull! Pull! The muscles in David's back and shoulders felt as though they were going to tear. Damn it. At last, the bucket reached the top. He secured the ropes and then climbed up the long, rickety ladders to the room. He heaved the bucket to his sieving machine, a metal frame which hung on leather thongs from 4 posts driven into the ground. It comprised 2 sieves of different mesh, one above the other. David placed the gravel in the top sieve and rocked the contraption sharply. The smaller gravel fell through to the second sieve. The larger pieces remained. These were called coarse tailings, and he searched through them, finding no evidence of diamonds. Next, he searched the fine tailings. He placed them on a board supported by 2 rusty oil drums, his sorting table. They were a mixture of small stones and fine yellow earth, and catching up a piece of metal shaped like a knife, he cut the pile into 3, and with a practiced motion spread out each pile in turn. He found several pieces of quartz, but no diamonds. He swept the tailings from the table and flung them onto a pile of detritus. Detritus? Oh, what is the word? What is the word? Write it down, write it down. If you don't know, write it down, write it down. If you don't know, write it down. Detritus? Maybe. Pile of detritus. The detritus? I have no clue. Then he took the bucket to the room, climbed down his ladders, and lowered it. By this time, Jack had dug another load with his pick, and the 2 of them shoveled it into the bucket. They did not look at each other, did not speak. Pull! Pull! David heaved once more on the ropes and sent the bucket to the surface. Again, there was nothing of value in the gravel, but he was not surprised. There scarcely ever was. It was 10 o'clock on a bitterly cold winter Sunday morning, and they had been working since dawn. Like everywhere else in the world, Sunday on the diggings was a day of rest, a day when you cleaned your tent, did your washing, smoked a pipe with friends. But not if you were almost broke. Then you worked 7 days a week. But a month had passed since David and Jack had arrived in Kimberley. There had been times when they had found a small diamond, the sale of which put a few pounds in their pockets, but most of the time they struggled to stay alive. McIntosh had been an early casualty of their ill luck. They had not been able to afford even his paltry wages. David sorted the new load of gravel, found nothing, and shouted down to Jack, "I'm having a smoke." Jack did not reply but dropped his pick, sat down, and lit a pipe. David found the butt of a cigar, which had once been an expensive Havana given him by Mr. Levinson, lit it, and sat with his back to one of the oil drums. The smoke, on an empty stomach, made him momentarily dizzy. He looked out over the diggings. Before him was the open cast mine, a huge gouge in the desert. The bitter east wind blew columns of dust across it and made the spider's web of cables that covered its surface shake and quiver in the yellow sunshine. Because some men worked faster than others, the hole was uneven. Parts of it were deeper than others, and there were frequent rock falls from above into the deeper claims, with resulting injury to the diggers. Most dangerous of all were the roads that crossed the mine. These stood up from the bottom as though suspended in the air. They were only wide enough for one wagon at a time, and a one-way system had been organized by the Diggers' Committee, the ruling power, so that no two wagons ever met. In spite of this, David had several times seen oxen panic and drag a wagon over the road edge to plunge down the cliff sides and crash in a broken heap on the mine floor. Twice, such accidents had killed diggers below. It was a crazy place to work, he thought. Beyond the mine, the desert stretched away into the distance. He could see plumes of dust as a line of wagons made their way into Kimberley. At a guess, this would contain water, wood, no trees remained around Kimberley, and pumpkins. But none of it would be for sale, for it was Sunday, and the farmers, devout Calvinists, did not do business on Sundays. Behind each wagon walked one or two black women. Occasionally, he would see one dart forward and bend down. He knew they were picking up the wet bullock dung and placing it in empty lamp oil tins to take back with them to their huts, where they would form it into small cakes, allow it to dry, then sell it as fuel. Once he had seen a white man, a digger, collecting dung in this fashion, and the memory had stayed with him. It was the ultimate failure, he thought. The cold wind swirled around him. He was dressed, like most diggers, in heavy corduroy trousers, strong boots, short canvas ankle puttees, a thick woolen shirt, a brown jersey frayed at the elbows, and a hat. He is Panama. Now a sorry-looking object stained with sweat and dust. The cold wind made his nose run, and he wiped it on his sleeve. His eyes were sore, but the dust made everyone's eyes sore. His hands were the worst. The cold had cracked the skin across his knuckles, and each time he pulled on the rope to raise the bucket, the cracks would break open, and blood would ooze to the surface. Hilda had given him one of the preparations they sold in the shop, a mixture of candle wax and paraffin, and nagged at him to use it, but the cracks never seemed to heal. He heard Jack's pick crash into the earth and rose reluctantly. He wanted to say where he was a little longer, perhaps close his sore eyes for a few minutes, but he knew it would never do. These days, Jack's temper was uncertain, and he did not want a row. He climbed down the ladders and began loading the bucket. At noon, they stopped for half an hour and ate a meal of bread, cold beans, and sugarless coffee, as they did almost every day. Their lives conformed to the general one at the diggings. In summer, they would be up well before light. In the heady days, when McIntosh had still worked for them, he would arrive about 4, light a fire down, and make them a breakfast of maize meal porridge. Then he would fill the bully with black, sugarless coffee, which they would drink cold during the heat of the day. They would work until noon. When the heat became too fierce, then returned to the tent for a meal of cold stew or cold beans, and lie down for an hour before returning to the claim. But the summer heat had gone, and so had Macintosh, and now they took their food with them and walked through the day until the light made it impossible to see. In the evening, when they returned, dog-tired, they were supposed to have their one hot meal of the day, but often they were too weary to cook it, and when they did, sometimes they fell asleep before it was ready. The hard work and short rations had caused each man to lose weight, and they wolfed their food like animals. David watched Jack under his eyebrows. The big man stared, unseeing, into the distance as he stuffed pieces of dry bread into his mouth. At first, as on most claims, it had been a black man, Macintosh, who had done the severe work. But after they had let him go, they had taken it in turns to use the heavy pick. It soon became clear that David could not maintain Jack's work rate, and so after several weeks, the work had split naturally. Jack broke the gravel with the pick, David raised the bucket and sorted it. Both filled the bucket. It was unusual for a white man to dig, although not unknown. It seemed that even the poorest miners could raise a few shillings a week to employ black labor, and there was a convention that thus was the way things should be. But even when they had employed Macintosh, Jack had complained at his work rate, and David had to admit that since Jack had taken over, the amount of gravel coming up for sorting had almost doubled. He recalled Mr. Levinson's phrase in The Coach, working like a cover. That was what Jack was doing, and at first diggers on their way to their own claim would talk in loud voices about the white nigger, until one day Jack had climbed the ladders and gone after one of them. That stopped the teasing, but it did not stop the long-term effect on Jack. It seemed to turn him against black people, and when Macintosh, down on his luck, had come to beg a drink of brandy, Jack would not even get off his bed to see him. From the way Jack ate, David could see he was in a sour mood. He dug the spoon into the cold beans and thrust it into his mouth. He tore the bread as though it had given offense. Brutally, hard work without much reward had given him a volcanic temper. Usually, David waited for a better moment before discussing anything important, but today his own mood was gray and hopeless. This wasn't why he had come to Kimberley. This wasn't what he had dreamt. Before he could stop himself, he said, "Jack, why don't we sell New Chance?" New Chance was the name they had given the claim. Jack did not reply but moved the beans around his white enamel plate. "There's still a good deal of yellow left," David said. "We could put the money into a different claim, try our luck elsewhere." It was believed that diamonds were found only in the yellow gravel. Underneath that was blue gravel, the blue ground, as it was called. And once you hit that, any hope of finding diamonds was finished. "I'm not giving up," Jake said. "It's not a question of giving up. It's using our brains, getting out in time." "No." "We're wearing ourselves out, crippling ourselves, and all for what?" With an angry gesture, Jack threw away the dregs of his coffee. "We'll never find anything if we sit on our asses." They walked on into the cold afternoon. The sun disappeared into the thick gray clouds. All color was bleached from the landscape, and it became monochromatic. At 5 o'clock, when it was almost too cold to sort the tailings and too dark to see, David found a diamond. He almost missed it. He had been about to sweep away the last of the fine tailings. As far as he was concerned, it was to be the day's last load. When he saw it, in the middle of the table. What? No. Yeah. So often had he found other diamonds in this fashion. There were many semi-precious stones that at first glance resembled the real thing, that he assumed thus to be the present case. He picked the stone up with tweezers and fumbled for his lobe, but even before he fixed it in his eye, his hand began to shake. It was always the same, no matter how small the diamond. The moment of discovery caused him to tremble. The Kimberley Shakes, they called it. Come on, Jack called from below. David hardly heard him under the lobe's magnification, and in the last pale light of the setting sun, he examined the stone. This was the worst moment, for now would be revealed whether it was flawed or afflicted by the dark area inside commonly known as the black spot. Either way, its value would be greatly reduced. But looking into the crystalline structure, he could see no faults. Get a move on! Jack shouted. Jack? What is it? Jack! The ladders rattled against the rock wall as Jack climbed. His red hair and bony face appeared over the rim. Have you... Look for yourself. He gave Jack the loop. After a moment, Jack said, It ain't flawed. David took back the stone and the lobe and examined it again. Jack watched, hardly breathing. Both men had been savagely disappointed in the past. The first half-dozen diamonds they had found had been flawed, so they were wary of jumping to conclusions. This one was half the size of a coffee bean and resembled a piece of bottle glass smoothed down and dirtied by the gravel in which it had lain. Are you sure? Jack said. Absolutely. The two men looked at each other, and slowly their tired faces broke into smiles. The smiles grew wider and wider, and abruptly their lungs exploded in great coughs of laughter. They caught each other by the elbows and whirled about in a jig, sending clouds of dust blowing away on the wind. Tiredness vanished, so eyes and hands were forgotten. They pirated along the rim of the mine. After some minutes, when both were out of breath, they paused, and Jack said, What'll it fetch? That was always one of his first questions. 110? 120 if we're lucky. The money would mean months of relative comfort, of decent food, of wood fires instead of dung. It would mean a new shirt and a new set of underwear, an evening or two at the Lanyon Theatre, and the knowledge that they could go to the Diggers' Retreat or the Cat and Gridiron, and have a drink on a Saturday night to wash the dust from their throats. It would mean security. They reached their tent in euphoric mood. I'm going to have a bath, David said. A proper one. He went out to buy wood and found a black woman to deliver 2 tons of water. Jack flung himself down on his camp bed, making it groan alarmingly, and placed his hands behind his head, a half smile on his face. When David returned, he made a fire, heated the water, and placed an old zinc bath between the 2 camp beds. He sat in it, luxuriating in the steamy warmth. Most of the time they washed themselves in cold water. The lamp was lit. The tent was warm. He felt his spirits soar. He had come to hate the dark chill of the tent. Now it seemed positively cozy. All the diggers looked after their tents with care and used every square inch of space. In their years on the diggings, David and Jack would enter 100 tents. Each was much like their own. 2 camp beds, a chest in which food was stored, and whose top was used as a table. 2 kerosene lamps, a few white enamel plates, and suspended from the tent poles, walking sticks, rifles, shotguns, rolls of chewing tobacco, and spare clothing. Those who could afford them bought animal skins to cover the hard-baked earthen floors. In spring and summer, sudden storms would cause flooding. Blankets and mattresses would become damp, then moldy, and rot in a few weeks. Suitcases served as pillows, pickle kegs as chairs, and the most useful single item was a billy can of grey enamel with a tight-fitting metal cup for a lid and a strong wire handle. 110, Jack said, breaking the silence. I'll take it to Peter. He'll give us the best price. Peter, our aunt, was a diamond dealer with whom they had done business in the past. I'll take it. I'm having supper with the Levinsons. Peter's office is on the way. I'll take it. There was something in the tone of Jack's voice which caused David to look sharply at him. He had not moved and was still staring at the roof of the tent. Why? David said. I want to, but I know Peter. I'll always deal with him. I get us the best price, don't I? I ain't saying anything about that. Well, what then? I'm just saying as how I'm going to do it this time. But don't you trust me? Is that it? Afraid I'll run off with it? Of course not. Well then. David shrugged. If you put it like that, yeah, it's in my pocket. He always felt a wrench parting with a stone, even though he knew it was necessary. Jack took the diamond. He stood up. I thought we'd have a drink to celebrate, David said. And then you go off to your friends. I suppose so. You could come too, you know. No thanks. Jack pushed his way through the tent flap. David lay back in the warm water, but the enjoyment had gone. Sometimes Jack's sudden changes of mood made his head spin. They had lived together as closely as any two men could for more than 2 years. Yet he would never have said he knew Jack. There was something about him that was impenetrable and warned of expressions of intimacy. His life seemed to be split into three: work, rest, and leisure. When he worked, he did so with all his energy and strength. When he rested, it was never with a book. In all that time together, David had never seen him reading, nor indeed express any interest in books. But in the now familiar position, stretched out on his camp bed, hands behind his head staring at nothing. His leisure, which depended on whether or not he had any money, he spent in one of the coziers or out at Portuguese Place. It was obvious that the time spent with Franz and Marie Delport on the journey north had been important to him. For the one place he always seemed happy was Portuguese Place. David had first gone there with him to celebrate the installation of the pump. Marie and Susan had come in for supplies and had taken them out in the trap. It used to take us 2 days in the wagon, Mary had said. Now it's only a few hours. David's original knowledge of the Delports had been based on one evening around the fire with Franz and Marie at the village of Victoria. They had seemed to him to be similar to the poverty-stricken farmers he had met all the way up to the diggings. Now he began to revise this opinion. Their trap was new, their track was of the best, and the two horses were matched to graze. The farm, when they came to it, was different from anything he had expected. It was approached through a large, imposing gate in the middle of nowhere. The gate posts were white, with the words Portuguese Place picked out in black Gothic lettering and, underneath, F. Delport. Barbed wire fences ran out in either direction as far as the eye could see. David had not seen such fences before and realized that they must have cost a fortune. Once inside the gate he saw sheep, not in flocks, but in ones and twos wherever he looked. It took half an hour to drive from the gate to the farmhouse, and during that time he continued to see sheep until he realized their numbers must be in the thousands. There was a line of trees which marked the Green River, and he was able to make out scores of red and black cattle standing and lying in the shade. The house, though built of mud bricks, was large and rambling. The reason being, as Franz told him when he showed him over it, that birds had been added over the years. This was the first part, he said, indicating a wing which comprised the original two rooms and the stoop, shaded now by a substantial grapevine. Then we built this section here, and a year ago that wing. It was a strange house, all on one floor, created without plans or drawings, so that in some parts they had to walk through one room to reach another. In others, there were little, dumb passageways which wound to the left or right, or simply stopped abruptly against a blank wall. It was only when David had viewed the house from below that he could follow the design. It was roughly owl shaped. The foot of the owl was the original part, with the stoop, onto which had been built a large sitting room which had a wooden floor. The upright of the owl consisted of dining room, bedrooms, a sewing room for Susan, and an office for Franz. The most recent addition was a bathroom which was to be fed by the pump with water from the river. The kitchen remained outside the house. There were a dozen or more huts at the back to the house the Hottentot workers, and there were several large stock pans made of river stones. A small field had been ploughed below the house, and this was where Susan was to have her garden. Flowers, Franz had said at supper that night to David and Jack. What will women think of next? The sitting room was very different from the early days. Auctions in Kimberley had proved a fruitful source of furniture, some of it in expensive yellow wood, others in mahogany. Brass and porcelain lamps glowed softly. There were zebra skins on the floor and kudu skins casually thrown over the back of chairs. Everything gave a feeling of substance and quiet wealth. The food, too, was excellent. Homegrown lamb roasted in its own juices, potatoes, maize fritters, and rice. As Franz was carving, he had turned to Susan and said, smiling, I suppose with all the flowers you'll grow, you will have the house smelling like well, you know what I mean. She took the teasing good-naturedly. I'd rather it smell like that than the way it sometimes does when you men light your cigars. Anyway, we'll have our own green vegetables. There'll be spinach and cabbage and maybe even lettuces if I can get the seeds. Oh, that's good, Franz said, looking down at the meal on the table, which consisted of nothing but meat and starches. He had served them and then said grace. David had watched the others under his eyelids and saw Susan, in turn watching Marie. Susan must have been in her late 40s or early 50s at that time, and had the leathery look of someone who spends too much time in blazing sunlight. She seemed to speak very little, yet it did not take long for David to realize that it was around her that the family existed. She was its heart. But now, as she looked at Marie, he saw that her plain, guileless face was worried. The moment he arrived, he had sensed a tension. Was Marie the problem, he wondered? She must have been nearly 20 years old. She had an attractive, oil-skinned face framed by thick black hair, but her mouth was turned down, and there was a sullen air about her. It was a look that vanished when she was with Jack. She treated him with a familiarity that David thought could easily turn into something else. He was certain Jack had not noticed. The following day they had celebrated the inauguration of the pump. The Lassings and the Jordans arrived about noon with their families, and fires were lit down by the river to grill chops and sausages. David had never tasted sausages like these, sharp and spicy, dripping with juices. They drank white wine that had come up from the Cape by ox wagon. Helmut Lessing had inaugurated the pump. It was steam-driven, and a pile of wood had been cut and placed ready. A small holding tank had been built on the slope above the house, and piping laid so that the pump would send water up into the tank, and then they could bring it down by gravity to the garden or the bathroom. Lessing lit the fire in the boiler and opened the draught. "Speech!" someone shouted. "Come on, Helmut," Franz said. I can't make no speeches." He had drunk several glasses of white wine, and now he stood, square and powerful, by the pump. Jack, Marie, and David were standing together, and Marie turned to Jack and, in imitation of the thick German accent, said, "I can't make no speeches," and giggled. Perhaps it was meant only for Jack, but it was loud enough for everyone to hear, and David saw an angry look cross Susan's face. Helmut Lessing pretended not to hear. He raised his glass and said, "Some men give the wives diamonds and pretty things. Franz here gives his wife a pump, but I now see why. It is the bathroom. He will be the cleanest man in all Africa." There was loud laughter at this, which served to relieve the embarrassment. "Come," Franz said, limping up the dusty slope. "Let us see if it works." That was the only sour note, but it had spoiled the day, and even though the Lessings and the Jordans were asked to stay for supper, both men excused themselves and their families. David helped to round up the horses and harnesses them in the traps, and he realized that these two farmers must also be doing well, for their gear and their horses were almost as good as the Dalports. That evening, Marie did not join them for supper, but stayed in her room. Susan was grim-faced and Franz irritable and short-tempered with the maids. It had been a long day, and everyone went to bed early except Susan, who sat on the stoop with a large black Bible on her lap, rocking gently backwards and forwards on a bentwood rocker. David was smoking a cigar, and the two of them had been alone for a few moments. Suddenly, Susan had said, "Do you read Portuguese, Mr. Cade?" It was such a strange question that he was momentarily nonplussed. "I'm afraid not." "Why?" "This Bible is printed in Portuguese. Look." She had opened it, and he could see spidery writing on the top and bottom of each page. "Someone used it as a diary or a journal, I think." She told him the story of the Bible and the crucifix, and how she had met her husband. At first, David had thought she must be making it up, but when he saw her eyes in the lamplight, he knew she was remembering. He lay in bed that night thinking of a strange story, trying to imagine what it must have been like for her, all alone after the death of her first husband, walking along the great river. His admiration for her had grown. He himself knew what it was like to be lost in the semi-desert, and he was sure he could not have survived her ordeal. He had blown out the candle and turned over to go to sleep, when he had heard a sound of tapping on the window shutters. He was about to open one when he heard voices coming from the direction of Jack's room, and realized this was where the tapping had come from. "Jack!" It was a low hiss. "Jack!" He recognized Marie's voice. Then Jack's voice, thick with sleep. "What is it? Open the shutters. Let me in." "What?" All trace of sleep had vanished. "I want to talk to you." "Don't be stupid." "They're all asleep. Let me in." "Go back to bed." "Listen, Jack. I want you to take me with you." "Take you where?" "When you go back to Kimberley. I'll cook for you. I'll look after you. I can't stay here any longer." "You're talking silly." "I am not. I hate this place." "Shh." Just then a dog started barking. "You'll wake everyone up." For God's sake, go to bed. David had heard a shutter close. Jack! Marie hissed. Jack! Then he had heard her feet on the gravel as she ran round the side of the house. Next morning, everything had seemed normal. Marie was demure and helpful to her mother and treated Jack in the same semi-bantering way as the day before. David had wondered whether he had dreamt it all. In late morning, much to his surprise, Mr. Levinson had arrived. He spent a couple of hours with Franz and, after the midday meal, gave David a lift back to Kimberley in his trap. Jack was to stay an extra few days. As they had driven along the winding farm road, David said, How did you and the Dalports become friends? Not friends exactly, Mr. Levinson said. Business acquaintances, more like. I got my start here through the Dalports. He described how he had bought the 2 sheep, slaughtered them, and sold the meat. It was fate. I've seen people come up to the diggings with the greatest schemes on earth and nothing come of them. But I hadn't been at the dry diggings more than a few days when I saw the wagon coming across the veldt. I wonder who that is, I said to myself. They were coming from a different direction to all the others, you see. So I said, Come on, Levinson, go and find out. It was nothing else but fate. They've done pretty well out of it. We both have. We both have. This whole valley is a gold mine, if you'll excuse the phrase in diamond country. There's Franz Dalport back there, and over there Lessing, and further on, Jordan. All rich men now. Lessing and Jordan used to try and grow corn and wheat, but when they saw the money Dalport was making out of sheep and cattle, they let the fields lie fallow and went in for stock. A good thing too. Kimberley can't get enough meat. It's only natural. If a man's been digging all day, he doesn't want to come back to his tent for a supper of green beans or cabbage soup. He wants meat in his belly. I've seen men sell their spare boots and shirts for a good beef stew. They had talked about the Dalports on and off all the way back to Kimberley, where they arrived towards dusk. But you don't still deal in meat, David had said, not being able to recall overhearing a butcher's shop mentioned at the Levinsons'. I don't kill sheep no more, and I don't deal in meat. I'm what you might call a middleman. I buy livestock in the Green River Valley and I sell to the butchers. I'll show you. He took him around the outskirts of the town and showed him the stock pens filled with scrap cattle and fat-tailed sheep. There's a sale tomorrow and half of that stock is mine. David had sat silently pondering this new aspect of Mr. Levinson's mercantile life. If he, Levinson, had made the Dalports and the neighbors rich, then Green Valley had certainly changed Mr. Levinson's fortunes. Then he remembered Susan's story of the Bible and her meeting with Franz. Yes, it's a romantic story, Levinson had said, tending the horses back to town. Old Franz told me once. It was the sort of thing that used to happen in the old days. He's worked hard. They both have. Just a pity he hasn't a son to carry on. Marie will marry, David said. Mr. Levinson had turned to look at him and then flicked the hindquarters of one of the horses with his switch. That's a different question, he said. How do you mean? Levinson hesitated, then said, Well, there's some who say she's 2 coffee, 1 milk. Oh no, please don't be cold. Oh, see, it's gonna be a brand new day. It's gonna be a brand new day. Hey, hey, it's gonna be a brand new day. Hey, hey, brand new day. Hey, hey, it's gonna be a brand new day. Yo, yo, yo. David finished bathing, put on his one remaining shirt, blew out the lamp, tied the tent flap, and walked into town. It was a bitterly cold night. The wind had dropped, the clouds had cleared away, and the night sky blazed with stars. Frost lay white and glittering in the moonlight, and the roadway rang like iron to his footsteps. He passed Peter Aaron's office, saw a light, and guessed that Jack was there, bargaining over the diamond. For a second he paused, wondering whether to go in, but he did not want to embarrass Jack after what had been said in the tent. Instead, he crossed to the Opoto Cafe and bought two Brazilian cheroots from Pariah, the owner, a sallow-faced Margarine who stayed open 18 hours a day selling vegetables, groceries, tobacco, and confectionery. Margarine. The streets were beginning to liven up for the evening. After a day of rest, the diggers had energy for a night out. And Sunday night, after the church services were over, was the busiest night of the week in the brothels. He was a few minutes late at the Levinsons, and other guests had already arrived. "Ah, here he is at last, the late Mr. Cade," Mr. Levinson said, bustling him into the drawing room. He shook hands with Mrs. Levinson, who was struggling out of a spoon-backed chair, then greeted the two guests. One was Peter Arendt, the diamond dealer. The other, talking to Hilda, was a man he had never seen before, and he was introduced as Max von Holzman. He was tall and good-looking, with fair hair and blue eyes. He wore a well-cut English tweed suit in the latest fashion. When they were introduced, he brought his heels together and bowed stiffly from the waist. He was an impressive figure. "Herr von Holzmann is from Essen," Hilda said. "He works with heavy machinery." "Not works, dear Miss Levinson. It is made in our factory." He spoke very precisely, and David noticed that his good looks were somewhat diminished by thin lips and eyes set too close together. Peter Arndt was the son of one of the partners of Arndt and Meyer, and the biggest diamond dealers in Berlin. David had met him at the Levinsons the year before. The two men had taken to each other. Peter was a few years older than David, a large, plump, pink and white young man whose interests in books coincided with David's own. "Well," David said when the conversation around von Holzman gave them an opportunity to talk privately. "Don't keep me in suspense." "About what?" "The diamond. Hasn't Jack been seen to you?" "What? Hasn't Jack been to see you?" "No." David frowned. "I thought he was going straight to your office." Mrs. Levinson waddled into the room. "Come along, the food is ready." "Allow me," von Holzman said, offering his arm to Hilda. As she took it, she glanced at David. There was a high color in her cheeks. He felt a sudden stab of jealousy. Their relationship over the past 2 years had remained one of close friends. He knew that Hilda wanted something more, but since the very thought of marriage while he was continuing to look for diamonds was out of the question, he simply could not support a wife. It would mean finding some other way of earning a living, and that meant Levinson's Emporium. He had deliberately kept their relationship on the level of friendship. There had been moments when something more might have developed. The first had been on a picnic to the Fall River, 25 miles from Kimberley. Jack had been with them, but after lunch he had walked along the bank to watch the diggers fishing, and David and Hilda had been left alone. David, sleepy from drinking wine in the sun, had lain back on the rug, placed his Panama on his face and closed his eyes. Hilda had begun to tickle him with a piece of grass. At first, to tease her, he had pretended not to feel anything, but then she had tickled his ear, and he had exploded into laughter. He had caught her by the shoulders and said, "Now I'm going to spank you." She had been laughing too, and her face, flushed by wine and sunshine, had been very pretty. In the mock wrestling match that followed, he had kissed her. She had pushed herself up on her elbows, looked down at him, and said, "I thought you would never do that." But Jack had returned at that moment, and there was no opportunity to take things further. The second time was a few months later. They had been left alone in the house by the older Levinsons. David wondered later if this had been deliberate. It was a hot midsummer afternoon with the shutters closed to keep the house cool. Hilda had brought him a glass of lemonade and had spilled a few drops on his trousers. She went to the kitchen for a damp cloth. "I'll do it," he said. No, let me." She had begun to rub at the spots. He had smiled her then, a combination of soap and the dried lavender she hung in her clothes cupboard over her own musky finger scent. That brought up in him an overwhelming urge to feel and hold her. He had pulled her down onto the settee and started to kiss her. These were different kisses, and he could hear the breath rasp in her nostrils. She had whispered, and had taken his hand and placed it inside her dress underneath him. He felt it contract under his fingers, felt it rise and harden. But the bell in the shop had rung, and she had to leave to serve a customer. By the time she returned, the moment had passed. He was caught in a dilemma. He knew that she expected his advances to continue. She may even have said something on the subject to her parents, for they seemed to look at him with renewed interest. But she was indivisible from the shop. If he wanted her, he would have to become part of the Levinson family, and he was not prepared for that yet. So he gave her only his friendship, and she had been hurt and angered. Now he watched in silence as she took her place next to von Holzmann, smiling and talking. Peter Arndt, aware of the situation, watched with cynical amusement. The Levinsons usually kept a good table, and tonight was no exception. They were fond of heavy, rich food, and David found himself tucking into herrings with boiled potatoes and sour cream, pickled cucumbers, Gof Gefolt. What is that? Gefilet fish, and ending with cheesecake. The flavors brought back memories of his childhood. As if divining his thoughts, Mrs. Levinson, who ate very little but seemed to grow more and more gross, said, "Did your grandmother ever give you such herrings in Russia?" He nodded. "Yeah, they were always cut up into smaller pieces. With chopped onions?" "Sometimes." "So you are from Russia," Van Holzman said. "Long ago." "Hmm, I've been there." David had been watching him. The food was evidently not to his liking, for he had only picked at it. Hilda, too, was aware of this. "Eat," Mrs. Levinson said to him. "You cannot work with heavy machinery if you don't eat." Herr von Holzmann doesn't work with it, mother. He makes it. "Work? Make? What's the difference?" her father said, filling his mouth with a cucumber. He crunched it, and juice squirted down his chin. David saw von Holzmann's thin lip close in distaste. Hilda looked down, embarrassed. For a moment, David had a flash of insight. He found himself looking at the room as von Holzmann, newly arrived from Europe, would see it. They attempt to civilize it by stuffing it with pieces that might have looked well in Lewisham, but could not hide the corrugated iron walls as the scouring lizards. He saw the two older Levinsons afresh, the father bold, plump, aggressively humorous, the mother gross, quivering, a sheen of sweat constantly on her brow. After dinner, Mr. Levinson settled in a comfortable chair and unbuttoned his waistcoat. "Pickled cucumbers always gave me gas," he said. "Father, please." "Well, it's true. Cigar?" Von Holzmann took out a fine leather case and offered Havanas. "Thank you, my boy." Von Holzmann took one himself. "To the lady's maid?" "Oh, no," Hilda said. "Father smokes in here." "Hmm. Come, Peter," Mr. Levinson said. "Give us a tune." Arendt needed no urging. Levinson's piano was a good instrument, and he often entertained them. He started with a Bach partita, and David went over to the piano. He loved watching the smooth, plump white fingers moving like spiders over the keys. When Peter had brought the final gig to a close, rested his hands on the keys, he said, "There's not a diamond in the world worth 10 bars of that." On several occasions, David had heard him say that his first love was music, and that diamonds bored him. At first, he had thought it was a affectation, but when he knew him a little better, he had realized it was true. He had studied at the conservatorium in Dresden and had wanted to make a career out of music. But his father had objected and had sent him to Oxford before taking him into the family business. I think that was a bit heavy for them, he said, and David saw that Mr. Levinson was dozing by the fire, and Mrs. Levinson had settled down with a pack of cards to play patience. How do you like our Persian friend? Ernst asked. Did you bring him? Yeah, he arrived a couple of days ago with a letter of introduction. I thought it would be amusing. David did not comment. Play something else. The fingers began to stray over the keys, and he began to sing. He had a pleasant light baritone and sang softly, as though to himself rather than the room. What was that? David asked, curiously moved at the song, even though he had not understood the words. From Winter Race, Schubert. Something else you can't buy with diamonds. Then he said, Is there an opera company in town? I don't think so. Why? On my way here, I heard a woman singing near the Landian Theatre. I haven't heard a voice like that since I left Germany. Von Holzmann and Hilda were on the settee, talking, animately, and again David felt a stab of jealousy, which became part of a pervading unease that had been lying at the back of his mind since he had learned that Jack had not taken the diamond to Peter's office. The music had brought temporarily elevation, but now the unease returned. If he had not taken it to Arndt, where had he gone? David, come and sit down, Mr. Levinson said. Here, next to me. His voice dropped. I hear things are still going badly. Until today. I find? Enough for a while. My boy, you're looking thin. Mrs. Levinson was saying only last week how thin you are. You're wearing yourself out. Now, I've got something to say to you. His voice dropped lower. The shop is doing well. The best year so far, but it's getting too much for me. Mrs. Levinson and I, well, we'd like a house at Cape Town, somewhere by the sea, and a trip home before we get too old. But someone must be here running things. That's why I wanted to talk to you. When you first came, I said, have your fun, dig in the dirt. And when you finished, come and work for me. I remember. I'll say it again. Mr. Levinson, let me finish. I'll make you an offer. It won't be working for me, but for yourself. I don't understand. A partnership. 70-30 to start with. But then, in a few years, when you know the business, 50-50. It was a magnificent offer. David looked around the room. Overstuffed, it might be, but to him it was luxury, comfort. There would be no more cold beans, no more grinding hard work, no more flooding of the tent. And if he wanted Hilda, he could have her. It was a settled, secure future. But was it what he wanted? Hey, don't decide now, this minute, Mr. Levinson said. Think about it. Peter ended a Strauss polka with a flourish and said it was time to go. David rose with him, but von Holzmann gave no sign of leaving. Outside in the frosty air, Arendt said, What about a nightcap? They went into the digger's retreat and took the glasses to a table at the side. A meeting was in progress at the other end of the bar. 20 or 30 diggers were seated on bar chairs listening to a man standing on a low table. Meetings of diggers were commonplace and frequent. They met to air their grievances to the town council about a host of things, from the price of water and fuel to the state of the roads, from the poor hospital facilities to the need for proper sanitation. David and Jack were too exhausted by the end of the day to attend meetings organized by the Diggers Committee. And he had little interest in the present one until Aaron said, "That's C.J. Rhodes doing the talking." David had heard of Rhodes, as had most diggers, but had never seen him. He was a man of medium height with a small mustache and a plump figure. His white soft skin reminded David of Peter. His voice was light and curiously high. David had heard how he had become a power in Kimberley by buying up claims in the right places. He was said to be a sickly man. Some even said he had suffered from consumption, but that the desert air had cured him. He was talking about the economics of diamond mining, and his theme, David was to hear it repeated on many occasions, was that the only way the diamond industry would prosper was if the sale of stones was controlled by some central body. If we can control the number of diamonds coming on into the world market, we can keep up the prices, he said. If we allow a free for all, the prices will drop. A voice from the floor shouted, "But who's to judge? You?" As David looked round, Peter pointed to a man in the front row on the right. He was dressed in a loud yellow and black check suit and held a brown bowler in his hand. "That's Barney Bonetto," Aaron said. "They say he's almost as rich as Rhodes." "What are you saying?" Bonetto went on in a loud Cockney voice. "Is that you aims to play God? You'll do the telling. You'll decide when the man will dig. Ain't that right, Rhodes?" Rhodes looked down at him calmly. "Someone has to control the outflow of stones, Mr. Bonetto. Otherwise we shall all go bust. Owners, dealers, and diggers." "He's right," Aaron said to David. "And Bonetto knows he's right. But they hate each other, so it doesn't matter what one says. The other will take the opposite line." "Why?" Aaron shrugged. "Bonetto thinks Rhodes is a snob. Rhodes thinks Bonetto's a lower-class crook." The swing doors opened, and Daniel Halkett came in, so David and Peter crossed to them. "Have you seen Joe?" he asked. "He went to buy fuel, and I haven't seen him since." "How long ago was that?" Must be 4 hours." Halkett's eyes continually wandered to the door as though expecting Malone to walk in. His face had the worried expression of a parent whose child is missing. "We'll come with you," David said. They looked in at several cozies until in a street on the far side of the square they heard shouting. "It's a roadshow," Halkett said. The shouting grew louder and they went towards it. The first things David saw were the 3 green and yellow enclosed wagons with the words "Mitchum's Marvelous Magic Show" stenciled on the sides. The last time he had seen them was on the Grand Parade in Cape Town. Just then the crowd gave a louder roar and Halkett said, "It's a boxing match. It's a boxing match. Joe'll be here all right. He loves a good set too." There were about 300 in the crowd, most of them diggers, but there were some women as well. The platform was as David remembered it, with a roped-off section at one end where the boxing took place, and the same battered upright piano at the other. He began working his way around the crowd when he heard a choking noise coming from a shop doorway. He peered into the darkness. "Hello," he said. "Are you all right?" There was no reply. He lit a Vesta and held it out, the glow illuminating the figure of Joe Malone. He was lying against the shop front, sprawled out on his back. There was a smell of vomit. Halkett pushed past him. "On your feet, Joe," he said. "I'll help you," David said. "I can manage." Aaron caught David's arm. "Jack," he said. "What about him?" Look over there. It was easy to make out the huge torso of the tattooed man in the boxing ring. Then David saw that the other one, his opponent, was Jack. He and Errant pushed their way through to the ringside. Jack was taking a terrible beating. "What's been happening?" he said to Peter. He's a drunk. He forced his way onto the platform and started insulting the big man. As he spoke, Jack reeled backwards from a blow to the head. Blood had spurtled flew. Jack was swaying from side to side, hands hanging limply, eyes glazed. The tattooed man was hitting him at will. "Jack!" David shouted. "That's enough!" But Jack did not hear. The little gravel-voiced Barker was acting as referee, and David leaned forward and caught at his trouser cuff. "Hey, stop the fight!" he shouted. "That's enough!" The Barker ignored him. Jack was stripped to the waist and blood from his nose was smeared over his chest. The crowd was screaming. Across the ring, David saw a girl whose face he recognized. She was the one who had sung so beautifully that night in Cape Town, the Surrey Nightingale, and she seemed hypnotized by what was happening. She held a gong in her hand. He elbowed his way to her, grabbed the gong, and beat it as hard as he could. "What the bloody hell do you think you're doing?" the Barker shouted. "He'll kill him," David said. Jack was hanging from the ropes. The Batavian giant was hitting him on the face and head, left, right, each time blood and foam flew through the air. "All right, Lothar," the Barker said. "That's enough." David and Errant climbed into the ring. Jack was hanging on the ropes, completely unconscious. He slid down first to a sitting position and then toppled over. There were rope burns on his naked back, a red robe draped about his shoulders. Lothar came over to look down at him. "You might have killed him," David said. The tattooed man touched Jack's ribs with his foot. "He shout? He talked big. I remember him from before." "Bring him to my caravan," the girl said. It was one of the closed wagons. Inside there was a bed, a table and chair, a small cooking range, and a hanging cupboard. Everything had been lovingly made. The wood was mahogany, the lamps were expensive, and there was a carpet on the floor. It was cozy and warm and feminine. They laid Jack on the bed. His face was covered in red blotches. The girl fetched a basin of water and a cloth and began to clean him up. "He insulted Lothar," she said. "He was drunk," Errant said. "It isn't wise to insult Lothar." David watched her, spellbound. She had dark hair that fell about a gypsy face. Her body was slender, but her breasts surprisingly full. She had light blue eyes, and against her black hair they produced a startling effect. "You were the one who was singing," Peter said. She began to put Jack's shirt on. He was still unconscious, but his breathing had become less ragged, and after she had sponged his face and neck, he began to recover. The wagon's rear door opened and the Barker squeezed in. He opened one of Jack's eyelids and said, "You'll be all right." He backed out of the wagon, then said to the girl, "Lothar said to tell you he wants you." She wet the cloth again and wiped Jack's temples. He said, "Now, Lily." She swung round at him, her eyes blazing, the skin tight around her mouth, and said, "You tell Lothar." She checked herself and said, "I'll be there in a few minutes." It took Jack another 5 minutes to recover his senses, and when he did, so he was sick into a basin which she held. She wiped his mouth and helped him to a sitting position. "I'll do that," David said, trying to take the cloth from her. Don't worry, it's not the first time. She spoke with a London accent. You all right, Jack? He said. Jack touched the raw scrapes on his cheek and his swollen lips, and he nodded. Come on then. David and Peter helped him to his feet and out onto the road. He called Arthur the N-word, Lily said. He shouldn't have. No, David said. He shouldn't. Peter, you take one arm. The rear door of the second wagon opened and Arthur appeared. He was still wearing his red robe. Jack saw him. He freed his arms and stood without help. He stared up at Arthur. Neither man said anything. Then Jack turned and walked unaided along the frosty road to the tent. The following morning, when David woke, Jack was still asleep. His face was a mess. There was the dried blood in one ear, and the left cheek was badly bruised and swollen. David decided not to wake him, but went off to the claim by himself. When he returned at midday, Jack was still asleep. It was a bright, clear winter's day with a warm noon sun, and David did the work of two, breaking up the gravel with a pick, shoveling it into the bucket, hoisting it to the rim, emptying the contents into the baby, separating it, sorting it, and finally throwing away the tailings. Then he went down the dangerous line of ladders to the claim for the cycle to begin again. He walked until the sun sank behind a range of low hills. Instantly, the air grew cold, and the shadows became blue-black. He collected his tools and went back to the tent. All day he had worried about the diamond and had felt an uneasy frustration at not being able to question Jack. Now he would wake him no matter how he felt. But when he reached the tent, Jack was not there. He set off to he set off for Dan Halkett's tent. Joe hadn't touched a drop since Cape Town, Dan said. It was bound to happen sooner or later. But what happened? They had a few drinks and went to a whorehouse. Where did they get the money? Halkett opened his mouth, then closed it. Finally, he said, Jack stood treat. David went into town. His initial anger had given way to fear. He looked into half a dozen canteens before he got onto Jack's trail. He had been into the Elephant and Castle, a one-room shack, had had a few drinks, sitting by himself, had bought a bottle of whiskey and left. Where would he go? Jack had no friends. He would not go to Malone's tent, not after last night, not with Dan Halkett there. But there was one place he would have to return to eventually, his own tent. David reached it and sat on his bed. He tried to read, but he was filled with anger and apprehension, which grew worse as the time passed. Shortly before midnight, he heard the crunch of boots on gravel. They faltered, stopped, came on. The flap of the tent was swung aside and Jack entered. They looked at each other without greeting. Jack's face in the lamplight was a mixture of red and purple blotches. He dropped his eyes and sat on the bed, picked up a tin mug, and poured himself a whiskey from the bottle he held, which was now half empty. Help yourself, he said after a moment. He pulled out his pipe, filled it, and inhaled the smoke from the rank, locally grown tobacco. How are you feeling? David said. I'm all right. What happened last night? Jack looked down at his big hands and did not reply. Have you still got the stone? No. You sold it. That's right. But not to Peter. That's right. Who to, then? Don't know his name. Come on, Jack. It's true. You mean to say you took a good stone and sold it to someone you didn't know? You don't expect me to believe that. I don't care, Tom. I don't care what you believe. Be reasonable. I'm only trying to find out. I own half of the diamond, you know. Jack did not reply, and David went on. How much did you get it for? Not as much as we thought. How much? It had a flaw. You looked at it. It was perfect. We were wrong. Ask Malone. Joe was drunk. He was there. How much? You said it was perfect. You were bloody wrong. There was a black spot. I don't believe it. We'd have seen it. You looked yourself. How much? Jack poured himself another whiskey and threw it into the back of his throat. How much? 40. 40 pounds. I told you, it was flawed. David half rose, then subsided. You said yourself it was worth 100. That's before I knew it was flawed. I don't believe in the flaw. I don't believe it had a carbon spot. He was leaning forward, his face close to Jack's. I think you were drunk and you wanted the money for a woman. I think you sold the stone to the first person who offered you money. He put his head in his hands. We work and finally find something good, and you. Why, Jack? Why? Jack looked down at his hands, as though to find an answer on the raw knuckles. You don't know why. That's the trouble with you. You can't think straight. You simply do things because you want to. All right, you got 40 pounds for it. I suppose you spent well, fuck. I suppose you spent some of it. At least there'll be something left to live on. He said it wearily, as though coming to terms with what had happened. Jack looked up and said, There ain't much left. He put his hand into his pocket and emptied a pile of silver and copper coins onto the top of the wooden chest. David waited, but there was no more. He poked at the pile with his finger. Is that all? He whispered. Out of 40 quid. Automatically, he separated the silver from the coppers. 22 and 9 pence. 1 pound, 2 shillings and 9 pennies. Jack, what the hell happened? Some of the truculence had gone from Jack's tone, and he looked abashed. Honest to God, I ain't got a memory for what happened. It's the truth. There was a humility in his voice that David had never heard before, and it was at that moment that he should have left things as they were, cut his losses, and tried to forget it. But the days of work, the split knuckles, the aching shoulder muscles, the cold, the dust that irritated his eyes, the strain of living from hand to mouth, the tension produced by Jack's often uncomfortable presence, all these things had a cumulative effect. Didn't you know what you were doing? He said. Didn't you realize what might happen? I didn't think. But you realize now, don't you? Yes. I mean, it was foolish. No, more than foolish. Stark raving insane to go into a brothel with a diamond in your pocket. I suppose that's where you sold it. Yes. But why, Jack? That's what beats me. Why? The big man shrugged. He opened his mouth and began to speak, but stopped. And there was a moment of silence. David could almost see him trying to marshal his thoughts, could almost hear the creaking machinery of his mind grind into action. At last he said, I don't know. Maybe it was just seeing you go off to the Levinsons. But you could have come too. You know you're always welcome there. They're your friends, not mine. That's not my fault. I'm not saying it's your fault. It's just the way things are. They were good to you when we first came. You know they were. I'm not saying nothing against them. It's just he groped for thoughts that would not come. And why didn't you go to Peter Arndt? You said you would. You said, didn't I trust you? And I said I did. But you didn't go to him. That's another thing I don't understand. We've gone to him for a year now, when we have had something to sell. And we have got the fairest prices. You've gone to him. But for both of us. It's been for the two of us. But it's been you. You sort the diamonds. You keep them. You sell them. But that's how we divided the work. You remember that. You agreed. Divide the work. That's a good one. I do the digging, that's all. I did too. We agreed it was slower than I dug. I'll go back to it if you like. I'll dig and you haul and sort. And then we'll see how much spoil we shift. No, it's not that. It's just that it's you all the time. You. That's just your damn excuse, David said, his anger mounting again. You have done something wrong. And now, you're like a little child looking around for someone else to blame. You haven't even said you're sorry. Sorry! The word came out as a roar. Sorry, why? Say it. The colors on Jack's face turned darker. Yeah, I know what you were going to say, David said. Began to scrabble for something under the bed. Just remember, it wasn't me who got drunk. And it wasn't me who stole the diamond. He pulled out a small japanned box, opened it, and took out a document. It wasn't me that blew the money in our whorehouse. He thrust out the document. That's our partnership agreement. It says we split the money, that we share it. Read it. Jack was forced to take the paper. Read it? Show me where it says one partner has to say so about anything. As though in a trance, Jack stared at the document. Well? David shouted. He did not reply. His eyes were on the paper, but he was frowning hopelessly. In a flash, David realized something he had not known before. Without thinking, he blurted. Why, you can't even bloody read! And threw himself back on the bed and laughed bitterly. There was a sudden movement and the tent shook. Jack was standing over him. He released the document and it floated down to the floor. For a moment they stared at each other. Then Jack caught up the bottle of whiskey and went out of the tent. David listened to his boots on the gravel until they gradually faded out. He lay on his bed for a long time. He had never seen such an expression on anyone's face. It had frightened him with its hatred. When his own anger vanished, he knew that he had done something unforgivable. He had recognized too late symptoms he should have seen earlier. He should have known Jack would become jealous of his friendship with the Levinsons and with Peter Arndt. He should have known that this evening Jack had gone to the Elephant and Castle to fortify himself for a meeting with David. He should have recognized Jack's tone when they began the discussion. Jack had been trying, the best way he knew, to apologize for what he had done without saying the words, "I'm sorry." People like Jack never said that, and David should have known it. And then had come the discovery that Jack could not read and his humiliation. When he thought of what he had said, he realized that nothing would ever be the same between them. Even if on the surface they managed to repair their friendship, and something inside him cringed. Like a small boy who wants to be forgiven, he went in search of Jack. Again, he wondered where to begin. Bars and brothels? But now Jack had no money. What was left of it lay on the wooden chest. Instinctively, David knew where he would have taken the remains of the whiskey. To the claim. He hurried along the road towards the diggings. The gigantic hole gaped blackly. The spider's web of cables were like ghostly threads in the starlight. He crossed the hole on one of the roads, trying to keep to the middle, sensing the drop on either side. He came out on the far rim. The area was dotted with sieves, sorting tables and mounds of spoil. He saw a bulky figure leaning against one of the sieves. "Jack," he said, "I've come. Get away." "I want, get away, or I'll kill you." Jack stumbled away onto the road across the mine. "Jack, for God's sake, be..." It was too late. Jack's body tipped to one side. There was a scraping noise, and then he disappeared. Should I continue? I was just an imposter. I tried to act like that because I thought that's what I needed to do, but that's not who I am. I'm not like that, bro. I am. Oh, you know. Okay, what's up, bro? accept me, don't accept me. It's okay. But don't try to disrupt my life just because I'm not what you think I am. That was your people's. Just that I'm like oh. What does it mean? 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 Hey, 301. That's a lot. Diddly squat, diddly squat, diddly squat, diddly squat, diddly squat, diddly squat. I tried my best. I'm scared. Oh God. What can I do, bro? There's nothing I can do. I'm terrified. Terrified of coming outside. Jack came awake slowly and for a few moments was completely confused. He had expected to see the dirty white tent canvas above him. Instead, he was looking up at a corrugated iron roof. The room was lit by tendrils of sunlight. They crept through shutters and gave enough light to make out other objects. The chair with its seat made of rawhide thongs, the washstand and basin, the hanging cupboard, the mud walls. Then he knew he was in his room at Portuguese Place. It was one of the rooms in the original part of the house, and he had slept in it so many times that he thought of it as his. He had been there nearly 3 weeks now, and was feeling almost well again. As the days passed, he had begun to put together what he knew and what he had been told. He could remember hazily the fight with Lothar, but he could not recall what had happened at the mine. He had no recollection of David's arrival there, but he did remember clearly and with a deep sense of bitterness the row that had before his fall. He did not remember the fall. They said he had been unconscious for several days, and certainly he had no memory of the journey out to Portuguese Place, nor of the first few days at the farm. The wool mattress was lumpy, and he shifted to another part of it. There was some pain as muscles protested, but nothing like it had been when he had first left his bed to stretch his legs a few days before. His body was big, strong, well muscled, supple. It was at its best, hard from the work of mining, but it had not coarsened yet, as it would with time. His white skin was almost silky with the sheen of good health and vigor, except where it was covered in fading bruises. It was a strong body, stronger than most men's, but no frame could stand the kind of beating it had taken from Lothar. Jack had suffered a concussion from his fall, but it was the beating which had done the real damage. But now he was feeling distinctly better, and he decided to get up. The day was crystal clear. Above him was a deep blue sky. The sun was just lipping the eastern horizon, and the last of the frost was turning into dew in its warmth. It was a golden blue day, and he felt his spirits rise to meet it. He had always felt good at Portuguese Place. There was something about it, and about the Dalports, that made him a different person. They had become like a family to him, and there was a bigness about the land and sky which made him feel equally big. Once David had come with him to spend a few days on the farm, and he had hated that. Susan had been comfortable enough in its presence, but Jack had noticed that both Franz and Marie were uneasy. They had tried to entertain him. He had tried to show interest in the pump, the water tank, the stock, and the work Franz Talbot was doing, but Jack knew that his interest was more polite than genuine. He was a person who worked with his mind. Franz Talbot and Jack used their muscles. There was a difference. On this glorious late winter's morning, he found himself walking down towards the river. It lay some 200 yards below the house, marked by a thick screen of mimosa and willows, winding its way through low brown hills like a green snake. It was the one important factor in the life of the surrounding land, for it never quite dried up. In summer, if the rains were good, it would become a brown torrent 50 yards wide. But for most of the year, it was a necklace of pools linked by narrow channels through which the current ran. The pools were lined by weeping willows and had a bottom had a had, what and had a bottom of sand. Father Francis, Don Manuel, and Barreto, who had come this way so long ago, would have seen little change. He reached the bush, which grew to a depth of 20 or 30 yards on either bank, and took a well-worn track to the water. There were game trails made by antelope and warthogs coming to drink, but this was a wider path which he had helped Franz to cut on a previous visit. The pipeline came this way. He walked to the water itself, where the pump gleamed on its coating of grease. He saw the big die-stamped maker's label, and his fingers went out to trace the letters. The Invincible G.A. Gwen, Hammersmith, London. He knew what it said, for Franz had repeated the word so often like a magical incantation, but he could not read it. He remembered what had happened in the tent. David's face close to his, shouting at him to read the partnership contract. His shame had been so deep, his anger so violent, that even now, as he traced the lettering on the pump, his hand shook, his face darkened with anger, and it took an effort of will to switch his thoughts away. He put his hand in the water. It was cold, but not as cold as he was used to, for already the sun was warming in it the shallow runnels. He stripped off his clothing and walked into the breakfast pool. The chill took his breath away. He could not swim, but he splashed water over his head and shoulders and watched the droplets glitter in the morning sunshine. He came out onto the sandbank and allowed the sun to dry his body. He inspected himself carefully. Bruises remained on his chest and stomach and high up on his shoulders. They had turned sulphurous yellow, and some had dark gray centers. Soon, he knew, they would disappear and it would be as good as new. He walked across to fetch his clothes, and Marie stepped out from behind a screen of willows. "Who gave you permission to get up?" she said, smiling at him. He stopped, covered his scrotum with his hands, and said, "What are you doing here? Why are you shy?" He turned his back to her. His clothes were at her feet and out of reach. Pass me my clothes," he said. "Why? Why are you doing this? Do you think I haven't seen your body? You haven't. Who washed you? Your mother." "I did." "I don't believe you." "Only your face and hands," Mother said. "Well, then, but you've got a mole in a special place." She had come up silently behind him, reached around, and touched him just below his navel. "About there." Christ! He leaped a foot in the air and doubled up, as though his hands and arms could hide his whole body. "Go away!" "No." "Please?" "No." Jack, who knew the inside of brothels in most of the major ports of the world and quite a few in Kimberley, did not know how to handle the situation. He ran forward and entered the safety of the water. She laughed at him. "Get away," he said. "Ain't you got no shame?" "You look beautiful, Jack." "I want my clothes." "Don't you want to swim?" "No." "I want to swim." "You can't. It's my river." She was wearing only a coarse wool nightdress, and in a moment she had pulled it over her head and was standing naked in the sunshine of the riverbed. She looked beautiful in the early light, her skin the color of wild honey, and her hair black against the morning sky. But Jack only saw her as an embarrassment, a threat to his relationship with her family. "Oh, for God's sake," he said, "what if your father—" As though at a signal, they heard Franz Delport's voice. "Marie?" "Oh," Jack whispered. "Get out! Get away!" "No," she said, dipping down into the water so that her pale breasts floated just below the surface. There was a wildness about her that he had never seen before. "Marie!" The boat's voice came from the thick bush on the far bank. Jack felt his heart seize. They could hear him moving through the bush about 40 yards away. "Marie!" he shouted again. "Are you there?" She turned to Jack. "Promise you'll take me away?" "Promise, or I'll call." "How can I—" "Promise. Listen." She opened her mouth and he grabbed her. He put one hand over her mouth and pulled her behind the long fronds of a weeping willow. He tried to struggle, but he used his strength and held her while her father walked along the bank above them. He stood there in the freezing water until Franz had walked away downstream. Then he let her go. He took his hand from her mouth first, and she bit him. She sank her sharp teeth into his arm, and he pulled away in pain. When he recovered his balance, she had scrambled up the bank, had caught up her nightgown, and was gone. He walked out of the water and put his clothes on in spite of his dampness. He was chilled and at the same time apprehensive. This was a new feeling, and he could not put it into words. He found he did not want the Dalports to think badly of him. He respected them, and respect was as close as he had ever come to love. It's called The fat term, Franz Laporte said. They were at the breakfast on the veranda. Jack had eaten a plate of maize milk porridge and was now being helped to a portion of lamb's fry. There was a kidney, a piece of liver, and this thing which Talbot called a fat term. It's like a sausage, he said, cutting it up and giving Jack a small piece. Only it's filled with fat. You fry it until it's crisp. You'll enjoy it, Marie said. She was dressed and looked as demure as a nun. Jack was bewildered at the memory of what had so recently happened. Some are long and thin, Marie said. That's true, her father said. And some are short and thick. And some are long and thick. They come in all sizes. She looked up innocently from a plate. I like the big thick ones best. Jack tasted the delicacy. It was neither one thing nor the other. He was chewing it when he realized what Marie was talking about. She was laughing at him. Susan poured him a cup of coffee from the tin pot. It was harsh, with chicory. So you went to the river, she said. You must be feeling better. I'm well enough, Jack said. You could do with a week or two more of good food and rest. He's as thin as a winter lamb, Franz said. He's not thin all over, Marie said. Franz looked up from his plate. How do you mean? I saw him down by the river. You watched him bathing? Susan said. I didn't watch. I was having a walk and he got into the breakfast pool. I thought I heard someone down there, Franz said. I called out to you. Didn't you hear? No, Marie said. Did you, Jack? He shook his head and Susan saw him color. The problem with Jack, she thought, was that his skin was so fair that the slightest blush could be seen. There was something going on that she did not understand. The bantering had a sharper edge to it than normal. For some time now, she had been aware that Marie had developed a passion for Jack. He was not that sort of person that she, Susan, would have chosen for her daughter. She looked at him across the breakfast table and saw the gingerish hair, the craggy freckled face, the big angular frame. She supposed that he was attractive to some woman. She sensed that deep down there was a violence in him that might be exciting. And then there was his rock-like strength that had an obvious appeal. She had always hoped for someone special for Marie. She supposed all mothers did that. Someone with a bit more brain, a little more polish. She knew Franz liked Jack, but she did not know whether he saw him in the role of son-in-law. He liked to have him around as he once liked to have the Lessing boy, Hans. They were substitutes for the sons he had never had. Both of them had hoped that Hans Lessing might marry Marie, but from the moment she had returned from school in Cape Town, Susan had realized that this was never going to happen. Marie's friendship with the Lessing children was never re-established. She had learned too much and too little. She had a veneer of culture and sophistication which went skin deep, but the Lessing children had nothing. They had grown up on the farm and been taught by itinerant teachers. They could never match Marie's experience. She felt superior to them. Susan remembered one incident soon after she had returned. They had given a homecoming party for her. The Jordans and the Lessings had come, the girls in their newest dresses. Family gatherings usually split into two, the adults sitting together in one group on the stoop and the children in another. This time, Marie chose to sit with the adults. You're being rude to your guests, Susan had whispered to her. Why don't you go and talk to them? But Marie had ignored them all day and had stayed with the adults. After they had their After they had departed, Susan followed her into a bedroom and said, "You were cruel to them. They came especially to see you, and you hardly spoke two words to them. They're children, your own age." Marie's face paled with rage. "They don't even wear shoes," she said. Susan realized how much she herself had become used to the roughness of farm life, for she had not even noticed that underneath their best dresses the Lessing and the Jordan girls were barefooted. Marie's anger had an edge of hysteria, and Susan had closed her bedroom door, thinking it was wiser to leave her alone. Her temper was unpredictable, and sometimes she showed a wildness that Susan feared. Once, Susan, after she had returned from school, they had gone into Kimberley for supplies, and she had vanished for 5 hours. Susan had eventually found her in the Elephant and Castle with a middle-aged man. "His name is Joe Malone," Marie had said in the trap on the way home. "There's nothing wrong with him. He's a friend of Jack's." "I don't want you in places like that." "Why not? Is it because we're rich now? Because we're the Talpots of Portuguese Place?" "It wouldn't matter if we had nothing at all. Ladies don't go into bars." Marie laughed shrilly. "But I'm not a lady. Don't you understand that? I'm just a—" She stopped. Susan was about to say, "Just what?" But she too stopped herself, and they both took refuge in silence. "What happened to your arm?" Marie said across the breakfast table to Jack. His shirt sleeve had reddened up and displayed the place where she had bitten him. He tried to pull it down, but she was too quick for him. "Look at that," she said, holding his arm and peeling back the shirt. "That looks like a leguan bite." Monarch lizards, though harmless, were sometimes seen down at the river. "I scraped it on a rock," Jack said, and once again he flushed. Susan looked at the mark more closely. It did look like a bite, but made with human teeth. She had bathed Jack when he was unconscious, and it had not been there then. The bite was on the inner forearm. Marie was holding his wrist, and suddenly Susan noticed the difference in skin tone. The pure white of Jack's arm with Marie's olive-colored hand superimposed. She felt her stomach clench, and she looked down at her plate. "It's nothing more than skin tone," she told herself. "We all have different shades. It's just because Jack is so fair." But thoughts like these had been occupying her mind for a long while, ever since Marie had returned from school. When you live with someone and see them every day, you don't see change, she thought. But after 3 years away, Marie had seemed a different person. The olive tone of her skin was the first thing Susan had noticed. Many times since then, she had said to herself, what if she does have colored blood? What if the half-caste girl had Galilee had recognized Marie as one of her own? Susan had seen octoroons and quadroons in Georgia. Selina the cook had herself been what the male slaves had called a high yellow. "Why is Selina yellow?" she had once asked her father. "Because God made her so." But why? Her father had paused, as though to explain, and then he had said, "One day you'll find out." And one day she had. Selina's father had been a white overseer in a neighboring farm, her mother a coal-black slave from Waidaw. For a time she had been bothered by the fact that her friend Jim was deep black while his mother was yellow, and later she had found out about that too. Black blood could come out at any time, even though it skipped a generation or more. It was there like some time fuse. But the half-castes, the high yellows of Georgia, were the result of mainly of white men on Negro women. What could be the result of a half-caste Corona Hottentot on a white woman? She could not even guess. She studied Marie. She did not look half-caste. Her features were regular and her skin was only slightly darker than Fran's. Fears were rubbish, Susan told herself. Absolute rubbish. Maria must never know what she had been thinking. She must never know what had happened to her mother. Marie and Jack were teasing each other, and Franz was smiling and drinking his coffee and filling his pipe. It was nonsense to worry, she thought. If there was any ground for suspicion, Franz would be aware of it. Then she remembered how often she had caught him, a worried expression on his face, studying his daughter. She had told herself his concern was at the girl's behavior. Diamonds? Franz was saying. Here, on the farm. I've never found one. Would you let me look? Jack said. Father doesn't like money, Marie said, laughing. He doesn't trust it. But think of, think of the stock you could buy, and a house in town. Marie was rarely allowed into Kimberley, so she had recently begun a campaign to persuade her father to buy a townhouse. The surveyor who came out to mark the boundaries was an expert, Franz said. He told me there wasn't a sign of anything. I'd like to try, Jack said. Mother says he should stay another 2 weeks, Marie said. Franz shrugged. I don't understand you people. You're a country that has everything. Sunshine, space, and where there's water you can raise stock and grow crops. Yet you choose to spend your lives covered in dust digging in the dirt. Even more petty thinks you're mad. When the diggers first came, I showed him a cut diamond. He looked at it closely, and then he looked at it and smelled it and said, It's like a flower of stone. It has colors, but you cannot smell it. It is dead. He's right. But I suppose if you want to dig in the dirt, I'm not going to say no. So for the next 2 weeks, Jack prospected for diamonds within a mile or two of the house. Sometimes walking, sometimes on horseback, always carrying a pick and shovel. At first, Marie went with him, but after a couple of days, she stayed at home, a sullen look on her face, and Susan assumed they had had an argument. She began to consider Jack more closely. If Marie wanted him so badly, why not? He seemed a straightforward man, and if he failed to find diamonds, as most people failed, he would probably go back to England and take Marie with him, in which case she would be removed from possible unhappiness. If he struck it rich, he might still go back. She could do worse. How many hours do we got? 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 How many hours? 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 How many hours do we got back? I want a cookie. Hey, I want the cookie. 200. Yeah, 200. Ba-dum, ba-dum. Ba-dum, ba-dum. Everything was the same when Jack returned to the diggings. The weather had turned grey, and an icy wind was blowing the dust. It was as though he had never been away. At another time, this might have been depressing, but now it was a relief to be away from Marie. He knew she was trying to use him as a way out of a life that bored her, and he did not like it. He reached the tent about dusk. David had come in from the day's work and was washing in a can of cold water. They shook hands wearily. "Feeling better?" David said. "I'm all right." David searched through the pockets of his coat and took out a thin wad of notes. "I found a stone yesterday. Not much. Here's your share." He counted on 15 one-pound notes. "No, you keep it," Jack said. "How will you live?" David put the money on Jack's bed. "I'm going out," he said. As the winter wore on, it grew colder, and there were occasional snow flurries. Jack and David became like automata. They rose at daybreak, dragging themselves out of bed, already tired before they had shifted a bucket load of gravel. Then came the walk to the mine, the endless picking, shoveling, sorting, back to the tent, and the evening meal. For most of the time they said nothing to each other. They spoke when they had to, laconic phrases that dealt with the day's work. Sometimes after supper, David would go off to the Levinsons or to Peter Adam's house, and Jack would be left to his own devices. He took to going to Malone's tent for company, but soon wearied of his stories. He knew, too, that Dan Halkett was not happy about his presence. They scraped a living. Just when it seemed they must run out of food, they would find a small diamond and replenish their larder. He guessed that, given encouragement, David would try to sell the claim, though gave him no opportunity to discuss the matter. The claim was the first thing he had possessed in his life, and he was not going to give it up. The nights were the worst. During the day he had other things to think about, but at night, after David had left the tent, he would lie on his bed, arms behind his head, killing time. On the chest near the door was a wooden box on which had been stenciled the words "Dingler's Tobacco," and alongside it was a metal tea caddy with the words "Maserati Tea" painted on it. He would mouth each letter, and after a time he was able to understand what the lettering of the tobacco stood for, but that on the tea caddy was indecipherable. Once he picked up one of David's books and, with his finger under each word, tried to make them out, but it was no use. He could recognize individual letters, but once they were placed in conjunction with others to form words, the patterns defeated him. Often he would think about the tattooed man Lothar. Sometimes he would relive the fight, or what he remembered of it, which was hardly anything at all. He saw again the smudges under Lothar's eyes, which hinted at age, and the soft punch, which hinted at weakness, and knew that if they fought again the result might be different. But there was no opportunity to prove it one way or another, for by the time he returned from the Dalports, Mitchum's marvelous magic show had gone. Winter gave way to spring, and then, almost as soon as the wildflowers spread over the desert floor, summer arrived, and with it baking heat, and violent storms. Diamond production, except it seemed in the claim, was up, and prices, as C.J. Rhodes had forecast, were correspondingly down. For several days, panic gripped Kimberly because of rumors that an American chemical company had found a way of creating diamonds artificially. Then the rumor was denied. Malone got drunk again after he found a stone of 12 carats. Mr. Levinson had a bad attack of jaundice, which left him weak. Herr von Holzmann rented one of the best houses in Kimberley, and he and Hilda were seen together several times at the Lanyon Theatre. David was approached by the Diggers Committee to become a member, but turned them down. All this passed Jack by. Work had become like a drug taken for its own sake. The struggle to keep going dominated everything. Even the possibility that one day he might find a diamond which would change his life forever no longer entered his thinking. One sultry summer's evening, when the black thunderheads had built up on the northern horizon and there were growls of thunder, he was sitting outside the tent mending the leather upper of one of his boots, when a voice said, "Good evening." He looked up and saw a woman standing a few paces away. Her back was to the light, and for a moment he could not make out her features. "Do you remember me?" she said. "Lily Bartlett. They brought you to my wagon months ago after you fought Lothar." He got slowly to his feet. "He ain't in," he said. "Who?" She was taller than he remembered, her light blue eyes a startling contrast with the dark hair. "My partner," Jack said. "Mr. Cade." She laughed. "It's you I've come to see. I have been wondering if you had recovered after the fight." Jack had become so enclosed by his own walls that such a possibility had not occurred to him. There was a moment of silence. "What are you doing?" she said. "I'm mending a boot." "Are you a good boot mender?" He smiled. It was the first time for many weeks. "I'm better at making coffee. There ain't no sugar, though. I'll get a chair." He brought up the fire and heated the coffee. "I heard you sing," he said. "Yeah?" "In Cape Town. I was just off a ship and you were singing in that big square." "We're going back there in a week. We've been to all the camps around here and every village in the country. Or it seems like it." "It's called a magic show," he said. "But I ain't seen no magic." "Mr. Meacham died 3 years ago, come July. We were in India. He did the magic tricks." "Did you go to Bombay?" "I know Bombay." Mm, that's where he died. A fever caught him. They talked for an hour. She told him how the show had nearly come to an end with Mr. Meacham's death, but that Lothar and the Barker, whose name was Wilkins, and Lily herself, decided to go into partnership. From India, they had gone to Ceylon and thence by ship to the Cape of Good Hope. They had been touring Africa for nearly 3 years and were on their way back to the Cape. From there, they would make a passage to England. "I haven't been home for nearly 6 years," she said. "I wonder if the old place has changed much." "Which part?" "Whitechapel." He was astonished. "But you talk so plummy." "Don't you believe it? I can still take you to the best oyster stand in the Whitechapel Road. Charlie Booth's." "I know it. And Auntie's for jellied eels. And Mr. Pascoe's for saveloys and black puddings." They laughed. "I could do with a plate of jellied eels right now," she said. Then she rose. "It's getting on. Thanks for the coffee. Have another cup." "I must go." Jack found himself struggling to say something. "I've not had," he blurted. "I mean, I don't eat till late. I don't mind, see? I ain't hungry." She looked at him quizzically. What I'm saying is, I don't mind waiting. That is, when you've finished your singing, supper." The word finally emerged. "Would you have supper with me?" There was amusement in her eyes. "All right," she said. 9 o'clock. That's when I finish." He watched her go down the dusty road between the tents and the wooden shanties, a tall, well-built woman who carried herself with an independent air. Many of the other diggers were sitting in front of their tents drinking drinking coffee and smoking their pipes, and he watched their heads swing as she walked past. How different she was from Marie, he thought. He could not imagine her giggling and flinging off her clothes and carrying on. But by God, he thought, if she cared for you. He felt a shiver go down his spine and a weakness in the legs. If she cared for you, there was something about her eyes and her mouth, a feeling of maturity, a female knowledge of he didn't know what, only that he wanted to be walking between those tents with her while the others looked on. He ran back into his tent and washed as well as he could in half a tin of cold water. Then he took out a clean set of underwear and a clean shirt, his best breeches, and a bandana for his neck. He counted his money. There was nearly 6 quid, more than enough. A small crowd had already collected for the show, and Jack stood at the back. Lily was singing, but the crowd had come mainly to see Lothar. He did not know the song, but again he was transported by her voice. This time there was no quality of sadness. He felt tremendous. He had money in his pocket and he was willing to take out the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. He wanted to turn round to others in the crowd and say, "That's Lily Bartlett, and I'm the one who's giving her supper." Not even the thought of Lothar lurking somewhere in the painted wagons could damp his excitement. She finished the song. There was a scattering of applause, and a voice nearby shouted, "Bravo! Bravo!" Jack turned and saw Peter Erdőn. His face was shining. "Bravo!" he cried again. The recital came to an end, and she took applause. "And now, ladies and gentlemen," the barker shouted, "after beauty comes the—" He paused and cupped his hand to his ear. "Beast!" they shouted, and Lothar stepped onto the platform. Jack felt a tug on his sleeve and turned to see Lily. "Here I am," she said. They went to the Digger's Delight, a chop house that catered for miners and their women. It was a place of some it was a place of some elegance. Here we go. With a sign which forbade spitting on the floor, and it had a piano player. It also had separate tables, which was why Jack had chosen it. He had never been there before. The place was almost full, but there was a table vacant on the far side of the room. Lily was strikingly dressed in a red dress with a black silk shawl. With her black hair and her red lips, she was a complete picture in red and black. As they walked between the table heads, turned to follow them. Lily, she paused at a table of 4 men. One rose and kissed her hand. He held onto it as he introduced her to his friends. "The most beautiful woman in the country," he said, "with the most beautiful voice." She laughed and patted his arm. Her eyes were bright and she had color in her cheeks. They looked past her at Jack. "This is Mr. She stopped. "Farson," he mumbled. "Mr. Farson." The man smiled and eyed Jack speculatively. When they were seated, she apologized. "No one introduced us," she said. "I only knew your name as Jack and that you shared a tent with someone called Kate. That's all I knew." "It doesn't matter." "But it does. It was embarrassing for you, and I'm sorry." She touched his arm in a similar gesture to the one she had recently used. A waiter in black with a white apron brought them a menu written on a wooden plank. "You choose," she said. "I ain't much of a hand at cafe food," he said hurriedly, for the hand-printed words made no sense to him. You best look for yourself. There's a hot pot, or there's a... No, I think I fancy venison stew. Won't get much of that in London." "Make it 2, he said. "Something to drink?" the waiter said. "Beer. For the lady as well?" His eyebrows rose. "No, Well, I mean, yes, please, Lily said quickly. Beer. Jack looked down at his place and found several knives and forks and spoons, and had no idea why they were all there. He usually ate beans with a spoon and meat off the point of a sharp sheath knife which he carried at his belt. He decided to watch what Lily did. The ease with which they had talked together only a few hours before had vanished. Instead, there was a vacuum which he did not seem able to fill. Lily, sensing this, asked him about mining and diamonds. When there were when there was a hiatus in her questioning, as there was several times, he said, rubbing his hands under the cloth. The four men rose from the table, laughing. They waved to Lily as they left. Were they laughing at him? Jack wondered, angrily. The food came as a relief. He ordered more beer. The room was hot and he was sweating freely. Lily, as though sensing that the only common interest they had was London, steered the conversation back to places they both knew. But even then, Jack was uncommunicative. So she began to tell him her own story, how she had been born in the East End, had gone to work in a candle factory when she was little more than a child, and had begun to sing there in concerts organized by the Wilburs. Later, she had won a singing competition run by a magazine which had offered a prize of 50 guineas. She had used the money to pay for speech and singing lessons, but it had run out within a year, and she had joined a music hall group called the Trou- Troubadours. Troubadours. From there, she had moved to Mitchum's and had started on her travels. Jack listened with half his attention. The other half was concentrating on how to balance bits of meat on a fork, something Lily seemed to do with ease. Several times his hand went out to grasp a spoon, but each time he stopped himself. It was a relief when he came to the end of his meal. Then she did something which astounded him. From a reticule, she took a small tortoise shell case, slipped out a cigarette, and lit up. He had never seen a woman, he accepted, he accepted hers, smoke. Have one yourself. All right. A voice above them said, Well, Jack? He looked up and saw Peter Arrant. As he mumbled the introductions, Arrant took Lily's hand and held it slightly longer than was necessary. Your voice is truly magnificent, he said. She smiled with pleasure. Thank you. That is kind. No kindness, I assure you. Won't you join us? She said. There was a shuffling of chairs, and Peter said, Allow me to get you something. He looked at her glass. Beer? I think something better than that. He ordered a bottle of champagne. Jack felt left out. The champagne came, and the waiter brought 3 glasses. Although it was the best French champagne, it tasted peculiar after beer. Peter was talking about opera and singers. Jack knew nothing about this, and although Lily knew none of the names either, she seemed impressed with Arrant. Jack stubbed out a cigarette and lit his pipe. The smoke swirled about their heads, and Arrant waved it away as he talked. Sometimes Lily would say, What do you think, Jack? To bring him into the conversation, but he did not reply. Arrant ordered a second bottle of champagne and a plate of kidneys for himself. He talked continuously about the singers he had heard and the operas he had seen in Europe and how he thought Lily could be a great star. In my opinion, he said, your voice could go to a higher register, become a coloratura, coloratura, a coloratura instead of a mezzo. That's where the great roles are. Bellini, Donizetti. You should be singing bel canto. Jack helped himself to several more glasses of champagne. He had a tremendous thirst. Arrant was continuing his thesis about the need for Lily to expand her repertoire when Jack suddenly broke in. What does Lily say? You tell her this and that, but what does she say? She turned to him. I'm not clever at this sort of thing, Jack. He knows 10 times more than me. It's you that's got the voice. But he got the knowledge. About what? His voice had grown louder. About everything. They were aware of someone standing by the table. It was Wilkins. Lothar wants you, he said to Lily. She flushed. Jack had had enough. You tell that bastard she ain't coming, he said. Wilkins ignored him. You coming, Lily? Hey, ain't you got ears? Jack stood up. Lily tried to restrain him. Go and tell that bloody half-caste. Wilkins backed away. Lily pulled Jack down. Hey, you shouldn't have said that. You drunk, Peter said. People were looking at them. Then their heads turned in a different direction. Lothar was standing in the doorway. He was dressed in Turkish trousers caught at the ankles and a white Russian blouse. He made a striking figure. Lily! He called across the room. Lily! My Christ, Jack said. But Lily was too quick for him. Don't let him make a scene, she said to Peter, and she hurried across the restaurant. Jack became entangled with his chair. It went over with a crash. Waiters were converging. Lothar stood at the doorway long enough for Lily to reach him, long enough for Jack to see him take her arm. Yeah, it's about a rough rum. Let me end it here. Let me end it here. Hey, yeah. Yeah.